Roman chainmail, also known as Lorica Hamata, and Roman plate armor, also known as Lorica Segmentata, are the two most recognizable armor types that were worn by the legionaries. Today we will compare both armors and run some tests in order to find out which one is better. So place your bets, while prior to testing we'll give you some historical background. Both armor types seem to have been mass-produced for the Empire's soldiers at one point. However, as it turns out, despite plate armor today having a greater association with legionaries, it was chainmail that was more widespread within the Roman army. What is more, it was used continuously since the early Roman Republican period through the times of Pax Romana until the Empire's collapse, only to later be used further by the Eastern Romans, the so-called Byzantines. Segmentata, on the other hand, was in use for more or less only 3 centuries, with the first models being found on the grounds of the Teutoburg forest, where Arminius and his Germanic warriors dealt a devastating blow to a Roman effort of conquering the lands east of the Rhine River. This happened in the year 9 CE. Segmentata armor can later be seen on both the Trajan column and the column of Marcus Aurelius. There were also a few archaeological finds, with the Corbridge hoard being the most spectacular. The last finds that we came across while doing research are associated with the 4th century, but they are rather scarce and appear to come from the fringes of the empire, clearly indicated a steep decline in use of plate armor. While doing research, we learned about one more incredibly interesting thing that I can't refrain myself from sharing. There is a Roman stone relief in Arlon, in today's Belgium, that depicts soldiers wearing something that looks like a fusion of chainmail and plate armor. Figures from the relief are clearly equipped with segmented shoulder guards being attached to what appears to be a chainmail shirt. Hamata with segmentata shoulder guards. How epic is that?
Okay, that's enough history talk. Let's test out our armors. The testing will be conducted within 3 categories. These being general properties, fighting, and everyday use. Each category is going to have 4 subcategories. At the end of analyzing every subcategory, a victorious armor is going to be given a point. This should give us a wide enough perspective to later generally answer the question which one is better, Segmentata or Hamata.
Origin. It is commonly known that Romans were masters when it came to copying good military ideas from their enemies and incorporating them into their own army. This can't be more true than in case of Lorica Hamata. Chainmail is undoubtedly a Celtic invention, and since it was the Celts who were the first people to sack Rome already in the year 390 BCE, the adoption of chainmail happened fairly soon within the span of Roman history. The adoption happened around the time of the first big Roman military reform. It was during the Samnite Wars, so shortly after the aforementioned Gallic sacking. When fighting these mountainous tribes, Romans learned that Greek-style hoplite fighting was obsolete for a hilly battlefield. Hoplite gear was exchanged for the one that suited their new manipular system better. Among that gear there was chainmail, which the Romans recently observed on their Gallic invaders. When it comes to Lorica Segmentata and its origin, at first glance the whole thing is a little bit more unclear. As with all Roman military gear, some researchers try to force an idea that Roman plate armor was also some kind of an adoption. However, here the argumentation is not very convincing, as the only plate armor used by the ancients before Lorica Segmentata was a dendra armor, which comes from the 15th century BCE Greece. That is Bronze Age era equipment, and other than being made from plates, shares no more similarities with the Roman armor. That makes us fairly confident that Lorica Segmentata was a purely Roman invention, and for that it deserves a point in the first subcategory. Aesthetics. That one probably goes without saying. It is Lorica Segmentata that is the more beautiful armor. As long as its wearer is not obese, it will work like a corset and get him that desirable V-shaped silhouette. On the contrary, Lorica Hamata can make its wearer look like he has a potbelly, no matter how fit he is. With that, it is not surprising that it is plate armor which is preferred by movie producers and reenactors these days, although perhaps it is not solely a modern phenomenon. It is believed that Lorica segmentata actually was not a very common type of armor. Nonetheless, it is omnipresent on monuments such as the Trajan's Column, as because it was erected in the middle of Rome, it served a propagandistic purpose. What is interesting is that the Torpaium Traiani monument, which is located in today's Romania, depicts the same war as the Trajan's Column, but surprisingly does not feature a single Lorica segmentata. Suspicious, isn't it? Anyhow, another subcategory point goes to Lorica segmentata. Weight. Here it is obvious again, the lighter option wins. After all, being a legionary on campaign meant spending a significant amount of time in armor, where most of that was marching and camp building. Naturally, everybody would want to pack light for such activities. Let's then simply get us a weight and find out who is a champion in this subcategory. Lorica Hamata weighs around 10 kilograms. Lorica segmentata sits at around 8 kilograms. This makes the latter a winner. Another point for Lorica segmentata. Before we proceed, it is also important to say that the Roman legionary belt, other than being a decorative piece of clothing, also worked kind of like a modern weightlifting belt. When strapped on tightly, it redistributed some of the armor's weight from shoulders to hips. It works better in case of Lorica segmentata, as this armor is generally more rigid, which helps in weight redistribution. This characteristic only reinforces segmentata's win in weight subcategory. Production cost. When thinking about how much it costs for each armor to be manufactured, we have to abandon our modern perspective, because today the situation is reversed. We have a massive worldwide steel industry that produces steel plates like if it was a walk in the park. For segmentata to be produced today, all that is necessary is to cut out appropriate plates and connect them with brass joints and leather straps. That's something a skilled craftsman with experience and power tools can make in a day. On the other hand, making a hamata is extremely labor intensive. There are hundreds if not thousands of rings that all have to be produced and connected together by hand. No matter the experience and skill, this just takes a very long time and thus costs more. In the ancient world with slavery and much less things to do, labor was a lot cheaper. Moreover, it would be also cheaper to make a steel wire for production of chainmail rings, rather than producing steel plates of adequate size for Lorica segmentata. Giving this ancient perspective, this time the point goes to Lorica Hamata for being a cheaper option to produce. Stabbing. Because most ancient weapons like spears and short swords were predominantly thrusting weapons, it is stab damage that we are going to discuss first when comparing the effectiveness of Hamata and segmentata in combat. So let us proceed to stabbing each other. From what we experienced, it looks like segmentata is a better option when it comes to countering thrusts. It is not easy to beat a thick piece of solid steel, although chainmail with a thick layer of cushioning in form of tunic and subarmalis, a Roman version of gambeson, does great too. There is no way that a thrust to Hamata will puncture skin, and with that deal any significant damage. However, because it still can leave a nasty bruise, in stabbing subcategory we feel like Lorica segmentata is a winner. Slashing. I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Our Gladius replicas are not sharpened, so slashing damage testing won't be 100% accurate, but should still provide us with a decent impression of what it felt like when a sword swing was met by metal plates and rings. From that experience we deduce that plate armor again does better, but it is not because it prevents a cut better, as both armor types do extremely well in this aspect. It is rather the fact that plates form a more sturdy surface. Because of this, a slash, which on contact with plates or rings turns into more of a blunt strike, and in case of plates dissipates more effectively. Another point for plate armor. Blunt damage. We have kind of spoken of blunt damage just now by saying that a cut on armor turns into a blunt strike. In that case, it seems like we have an obvious winner for this subcategory again. But as not to close this section so quickly, let's do some testing anyways. For it, we will need an ancient blunt weapon. But Was there even such a thing? What could we use that would be historically accurate? Oh yeah! Shield can be a weapon too, although our testing will be conducted with a Germanic shield, because it has a smaller edge and thus should deal more damage. As we thought, there goes another point for Lorica Segmentata. Dexterity. Well, we've discussed 3 types of blows, but naturally when you're in a fight, you rather want to avoid receiving any hits at all. That can be done with both dodging and shield covering. Both actions are easier when an armor does not restrict its owner's dexterity. Let this be the last thing that we look at in the fighting category. Lorica Segmentata, although being lighter and more resistant to all types of damage, actually does worse when it comes to dexterity. It does not restrict its user's shoulders, but torso is a different story. Plates here are very tightly connected together, which inhibits any type of leaning. On the contrary, Lorica Hamata, being nothing more than a metal shirt, behaves unsurprisingly like a shirt, but a heavy one. Other than giving its user a few extra pounds, it doesn't limit his movements, not even by a tiny bit. For that, this time a point goes to Lorica Hamata. Strain on clothing. Being made out of metal, armor can have a bad influence on its user's tunic. When steel gets rusty, it leaves nasty stains. After cleaning, armor is usually covered with a protective layer of oil, which is just as bad in the stain generation department. While both Hamata and Segmentata are made out of the same metal, it is Hamata that leaves the more persistent stains. It is due to it being made out of many rings. When these rub on each other, they generate more metal ash, which once it gets onto wool is very hard to remove. For the same reason, chainmail is also worse when it comes to rubbing and eventually ripping holes in tunics. The plentifulness of rings results in more snagging edges in Lorica Hamata. With chainmail, a legionary is required to repair and change his tunics more often. Looks like Lorica Segmentata is a winner again. Sleeping. Yup, sleeping in armor was not something alien to the Roman legionaries. Just imagine, you're in the middle of Germania, crossing another vast and murky forest. The marching column is constantly being harassed by ambushes. In such a situation, would you really be willing to take off your armor only to get a little bit higher quality sleep? That's what I thought. Instead, it's best to pick an armor type that will be the most comfortable for such hazardous sleeping. Having experience laying on the ground in both Hamata and Segmentata, we came to a conclusion that Hamata, being just a heavy metal shirt, will result in better quality sleep. Chainmail has no biting edges and hinges. What is more, because it is loose, it more precisely adjusts to any of the positions that its user takes. I am happy to say that this time Lorica Hamata gets a point. Air conditioning. Let's now travel from Germania to Italy, Greece, or even the Middle East and Egypt. Oof, can you feel the heat? Roman legionaries had to endure a lot of it. That is also the reason why Romans avoided trousers for so long. But in this video we are talking about armor. So which one, Hamata or Segmentata, is better for the scorching heat of the sun? Roman plate armor is tight. Wearing it feels like being closed up in a can, and that certainly is not great for high temperatures and long sun exposure. Lorica Hamata, on the other hand, is full of tiny holes and ventilates well. It is even possible to jiggle it for better effect. Moreover, sweat will evaporate more quickly from underneath chainmail than from underneath rigid steel plates. Hamata is a clear winner here. Maintenance. There's nothing worse than having an officer find out that your gear is left dirty and neglected. It's every soldier's duty to keep his equipment in a pristine condition. Armor is the first thing that catches an eye during military muster. For that reason, a soldier would rather prefer one that is easier to clean and repair. That is not something one can say about Lorica Segmentata. Cleaning it requires a lot of rubbing and getting in between plates. Moreover, to clean all the plates completely, a soldier would first need to dismantle all those decorative hinges, as it is very hard to clean in between those sophisticated shapes. On the other hand, to clean chainmail, all one needs to do is to attach it to a rope and drag it through sand a couple of times. The little granules will do all the work for you. Wow, Lorica Hamata did very well in this category, as it earns yet another point here. The final score is pretty close. We have Lorica Segmentata with 7 points and Lorica Hamata with 5 points. Although we wish we could give you a definitive winner in this clash of armors, it seems that the matter is not that obvious. Our score is not very precise. It would be best to weigh the importance of every point and create some kind of a formula. Who knows, perhaps this would result in Lorica Hamata gaining more points. After all, there is a reason why chainmail has a wider presence in antiquity over plate armor. The fact that Lorica Hamata was cheaper to produce and adapted better to everyday use could have had a great influence on eventual abandonment of Lorica Segmentata, especially when we consider that Romans might not have really cared about their armor's origin and aesthetics too much.
And what do you guys think? Which legionary armor is better? Are there any other things we should have considered for this comparison? Let us know. The comments section is all yours. As we've seen, history proves that in a war, practicality most often wins over great looks. In reenactment though, well, that's a different story. When you spend months worth of salary on equipment, you rather want to look good. That is why we've partnered up with Fabbrica Cacti, the best ancient reenactment equipment producer that's out there.
Our plate armors were made by them. Every armor they produce is custom made. Before they start working on your new favorite possession, you're required to provide them with detailed dimensions of your body, so the final product suits you perfectly. Get your own Lorica Segmentata from Fabbrica Cacti for 5% cheaper with a code CONTUBERNIUM5. Don't overthink it though. Contact them ASAP, tell them who sent you, and get your armor cheaper. The code works only until the end of 2025. As always, thank you guys for watching, subscribe for the glory of Rome, and remember, Carthago delenda est, et Roma caput mundi.